Jasmine Crockett. She's a real one, and she's pretty strong in her convictions. This time she's not walking back, comparing Donald Trump to Hitler. This is what she said. I said what I said. Okay. And oh, yeah. Representative Jasmine Crockett compared Trump to Hitler on the Breakfast Club podcast. That was a few months ago. On CNN, she doubled down on the stance. Listen.
When we see the consolidation of power, when we see them trying to chill speech of jokesters, when we're seeing all of this, that is a playbook out of Hitler, and I won't deny it. Like, these are the facts. But one of the things that I've never done that the president has done consistently is called specifically for violence. He has said, oh, beat that one up. He has said those types of things.
So, unapologetic. We'll give you the context. She was on CNN's State of the Union on Sunday morning, and she was shown several clips by the co-host, Dana Bash, of her making inflammatory remarks, including calling President Donald Trump a, quote, wannabe Hitler. Bash pressed Crockett whether she had a responsibility as an elected official, not to raise the temperature, but rather lower the temperature, especially when you consider conservative activist Charlie Kirk was just shot and killed for his political beliefs. That is the allegation, and it seems it's looking perhaps that way. So take a listen to when she called him the wannabe Hitler comment.
We've got to talk about like what it means when you're running for president or you're running for one of these higher offices and you go out there and you talk about beating people up. You go out there and you say things like, I could shoot somebody in the middle of the street in New York and I could still win. We got to talk about like that. That is next level. Mm-hmm. Me disagreeing with you, me calling you, a wannabe Hitler. All those things are like not necessarily saying go out and hurt somebody. But when you're literally telling people at rallies, yeah, beat them up. And that kind of stuff, like you are promoting like a culture of violence. So we need to talk about like what it looks like when you don't promote a culture of violence.
So the Texas congressman, again, standing her ground, declining to distance herself from past comments. Instead, she did double down. She said the way Trump has acted lately, including celebrating Jimmy Kimmel's suspension from ABC, make it fair to compare the USA to the Third Reich. Crockett continued her wordy diatribe by saying Trump, by inciting violence January 6, 2021, and his other actions, has shown he is an authoritarian. Congresswoman also said she has no time for political enemies, who she referred to as they, who deny the historical facts, which she said included American slavery. So what she's saying is, to her, it's a simple issue of black and white, no pun intended, right? She's saying that these are the facts, and I'm only responding to them. Yeah. She also stated this, just like they don't want to talk about the fact that slavery was real in this country and that my people were enslaved and dragged and raped and abused, and they don't want to account for any of that, they don't believe in reparations. No, I think it's okay for me to understand history, communicate in a very clear way about why we should feel as if there is a concern. So maybe on this shoulder, I had that conversation with Jank right in my ear about this. We should not become this, right? It's not helping anything. It's just creating a bigger divide. And if everybody stops talking to each other and just does name calling, well, we're never going to get anywhere. Which is why, in part, he justified sitting down, like Charlie Kirk in that regard, with anyone. He'll have a conversation. He'll use his words. And then over here on this shoulder, it's perhaps Crockett on her bad-built butch body days. And she's telling me, we're not getting anywhere anyway. We're not getting anywhere because we've been demonized, and sometimes you got to fight fire with fire, particularly when someone's truth denies you your real truth, your reality, your existence. Mm-hmm. And it just depends on the day or what I'm shouting at a cable news channel in the moment. If I'm with Jank or bad built butch body, mm-hmm. Representative Crockett. What do you think?
I think that's an excellent point that, probably doesn't get talked about as often as it should. The fact that, even for us, we talk about this stuff all day and we're in our feelings about it because it's hard not to be. Um, we're going to feel one way one day, and then the next day we'll be like, I should have been, more forgiving, or I should have been more egalitarian, or whatever it is, right? But the fact of the matter is that these are issues that affect people in very, very real ways. And so people are going to have very visceral reactions to them. And sometimes those reactions, are maybe not us on our best day. But what we're seeing happen here is something that we're seeing a lot more lately, especially this month. You're no longer allowed to just repeat something that someone else has said, right? It's not necessarily just because it makes someone look bad, but because more so, I think that it contradicts the narrative that they, to use Jasmine Crockett's term, they are pushing on the public, right? So we're seeing a lot of revisionism that is happening very acutely lately. But this is a thing that we have seen a lot of, especially coming from Republicans, because they don't want to acknowledge certain things that have happened. I always thought it was funny how they demonized the term woke and kind of like took it over as their own, because wokeism, right? Like that, all that meant, stay woke, was to open your eyes and see what's happening, and be aware of the world around you, and be aware of the history and the implications and everything. It was about being educated. It was about being thinking for yourself and seeing what's in front of you and analyzing it and understanding it. And that was something that the Republicans decided to demonize and say that's a bad thing to do, right? Because whenever people look into a lot of these figures from history, people who have been celebrated throughout history without much question, whenever you do just look into the history a little bit, you realize these people are not as good as they were said to be. And a lot of the mythology around them is exactly that. It's myth. It's just not true. And it's kind of interesting to see that happening right now in real time with a character like Charlie Kirk. We all knew him just a few months ago or a few weeks ago as, this guy who had a show, he was a podcaster, and he was kind of, he was looked at in a certain way. I would not have said back then that he was as revered as a political figure, certainly not to the levels of MLK Jr., as what they're trying to say that was his story now, right? They're trying to elevate his status to be so much more than what I remember it being while he was alive. And it's interesting because like that narrative is being pushed onto the American people on both sides. If you say anything that is not that, then you are liable to be taken off the air. But it's also interesting because a lot of people just simply don't remember him that way. And then on the left, a lot of people were just posting his own quotes, and they were getting in trouble for doing so, even though sure, you can argue that there was context involved. Sure, you can argue that, this is what he was actually trying to say. But I think whenever you get into that territory, like you're doing too much, right? You're protesting a little bit too hard at that point. And that was the message that people were receiving from him, right?
Yeah.
The quotes is what people were hearing. The people who did not like him, the people who said that he was antagonistic to people like me, that's what they were hearing, is they were hearing that he was antagonistic towards entire groups of people while he was alive. And now he's being revered as like a hero of civil rights. And the revisionism it's jarring to watch happen in real time.
Yeah. Listen, we'd be dishonest if we didn't say that number one, Charlie Kirk, according to reports, had 1 million people watching that's a wildly successful podcast. It
Yeah,
is.
of course.
He had followers who perhaps did look at him, revered him in a way that you or I would have looked up to a Martin Luther King Jr., as you pointed out, much different in the way they spoke and the things that they espoused. That said, we would be dishonest if we didn't just tell the truth. Comedians, late night comedians, and I'm sure Jimmy Kimmel can be counted among them, and Saturday Night Live too,
Mhm.
have less work for them, but it's true commentary and what we're dealing with today, have
Mhm.
taken the full script of what was actually said by certain people, including the president. And there were your jokes. They didn't have to change a word. You said it. But for that, you are not allowed to deviate from this narrative that, as you mentioned, has been sanitized, twisted. Look, even the word great has been corrupted and expanded upon. Make America great again. Do you mean more races?
We never
More
got any clarification on that. And we asked when he first came out with that slogan, we said, what does that mean? And we never got any kind of clarification as to what great meant in his esteem and like what he was trying to get back to. We never learned that. And another important point that I think, going back to your point about what Cenk was saying, he had 1 million followers on his show, Charlie Kirk. 1 million people sounds like a lot, but in the greater scheme of like our country, it really is. It's not like, everybody around the world or even around this country knew what he was saying and intimately knew his words and his message to that extent. So you kind of have to like put it all into that greater context as far as who he was. Like the fact that the way he was killed certainly got a lot of eyes on this story. Like just a horrific experience, like I personally didn't see it, thank God, but a lot of people did. And so that got a lot of headlines on its own. But before that, he was just like, some guy with a show on YouTube for a lot of people, for people who maybe who had heard of him but weren't actively watching and listening to his show. So I think that also is something to take into consideration.
country divided.
Mhm.
I mean, I'll admit, Turning Point USA, his face was on it. The widow, Erica Kirk, will continue it, and it is for if you are in that orbit, and there are a lot of people who are, it's wildly successful for them.